Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad to see so many of you tonight. It's awesome. We actually have a lot of people registered too, so we're hoping that more people join us as we go. And I think this is probably one of those times when people will, because it's something that's really important for all of us. So welcome to AC Connect. I'm Leah, and I'm with the Alberta Leaders Caucus, and my co-facilitator is Christy Scarlett with the AC board. So welcome this evening. We're not going to talk too much tonight because we have the wonderful Rob with us. Just a couple of notes to make everyone aware of before we really get going. So as always in our AC Connect sessions, we're sharing information, but we don't have the be all and end all of information. We're making space for us all to learn from one another and from experts in the field and for people who've done analysis of information, but that doesn't mean this is the only information that's out there. So we ask you to sort of keep that in mind and share your own feedback and stories when there's time. And just so that everybody is aware, we are recording this session. So it will be available on AC's website after if you want to revisit it, or if there's people who missed it, or you want to share it with other people in the field or people you know. So that does mean also that if you do speak or if we're answering one of your questions, that'll be on the recording. We do keep the question log, and so if needed, we can follow up with you afterwards or try and find an answer to a question if we don't know it during the session. So you will see the question box in your panel on the right side. Me and the left and right don't always get along. On the right side of your screen. And so you can use the question box to ask a question. Those go directly to us as organizers. And so someone will get back to you, or at the end, if there's time for question and answer and kind of that sharing piece, we might read that question out loud and talk about it. Otherwise, if you have a microphone on your device, when there's time, you can use the hand up function. And then we will unmute you on our end and say that you're unmuted. You will still have to unmute yourself on your end when you want to talk. So that's kind of the basics of how we'll go through things this evening. Just a couple of notes about AC's work and what's happening in the field. We're sharing information from Rob and the Community University Partnership and the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Childcare. I always mix up all the E's and the C's. But know that AC is still working with government and with other stakeholders in terms of understanding what this new agreement is and how it's rolling out. And also remember that Minister Schultz has asked for feedback. So please give the feedback that you have. And there's lots of ways to do that. One of them is here. So I will stop talking and let Rob take over. We're super excited to introduce Rob Buschmann. I won't say very much because I'll let you tell people about yourself, but he's worked with AC and AECEA and other early learning groups in Alberta and has really kind of done some deep diving into data and to understand sort of the nuances of some things. And so that, thankfully for us, applies to this new subsidy and fee model that we're working with in Alberta. So I will stop sharing and I will pass it over to Rob to share, and I will let you take us through.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, let me put this up and put that up. Oops. And we'll do it from the beginning. Oh, we won't do it from the beginning. Hang on. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay. So thank you very much, Leah. And I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be able to talk about the new childcare affordability system in Alberta. I'm calling it the affordability system. Before I get started, I just want to let everybody know I'm joining from Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory. I am a research associate at the University of Alberta at the Community University Partnership. for the study of children, youth, and families within the School of Public Health. I have shortened that to just University of Alberta on this presentation. I'm also a member of the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care. So those are the direction, that's where I'm coming from here. And really tonight, I'm just going to try to walk through so we can try to figure this thing out together. So for those of you who just want to quit after 30 seconds, here's the 30-second summary of what I'm going to say. This new system is more generous than the old system for families. But the new system risks leaving lower income families behind because it's not as need-based as the old system was. When I say the old system, I mean the system that's just a couple of months ago. And the third is that we can fix this problem in the short term, but in the long term, we should really consider some more fundamental changes to the affordability system. So let's dive in a bit. So what was the old affordability system? Well, it had two parts from my reckoning. The first was a parent subsidy, and that was a full subsidy for licensed care. And when I say full subsidy, I don't mean it covered the whole cost. That means it was the most subsidy you could get up to a certain point. And it was for licensed care for each child in a family making up to $49,999 a year. And then from $50,000 to $89,999, families got a partial subsidy, but it decreased in value every $5,000 in income that as the family's income increased. That subsidy amount varied on a few things. The child's age, so infants got more than preschoolers, and type of full-time program, so a center or a family day home. But it didn't vary based on where you were in Alberta or on the fees of the program that the family or the person was attending or child was attending. So that's full-time programs. For part-time preschool programs, subsidy did not vary by income or child's age or location within Alberta. It was just $125 for everyone as long as you made under $90,000 a year. Parent subsidy did require parents to apply, and applicants had to meet certain what we call social criteria. And I won't go into those, but it did require an application, and you had to meet the criteria. The second part of the old affordability system was something called the infant care incentive, and I'm including this. It was $150 per infant space per month, but it didn't have to be passed through to parents as savings. It could be part or all of it, but it didn't have to be. It was at the program's discretion. So that's my sort of totaling of the affordability system for parents. Before I go into the new affordability system, I just want to quote the goals for it. And this is directly from the Government of Alberta's website. So over the next 5 years of the agreement, this is the federal Alberta federal agreement that was signed in November. So reduce licensed childcare fees by an average of 50%. We're going to come back to the average for families with children 0 to kindergarten age, and that's by early 2022. And longer term goal, lower average licensed childcare fees to $10 per day for families with children 0 to kindergarten age, and that's by 2025 to 2026. So how are we going to achieve this? Well, the old affordability system had two parts. The new one has three parts. The first two are the same, the parent subsidy. I will say that the subsidy, the parent subsidy, or what we call the parent subsidy, is greatly reduced in dollar value compared to the old one. It now maxes out at $266 for a full subsidy compared to $644 for a preschool age child, and it was more for infants under the old, or toddlers and infants under the old system. The full subsidy is now available for families who make up to about $120,000 in annual family income, and then a partial subsidy for $120 to about $180. That also decreases every $5,000 up in income. The subsidy amount, interestingly, no longer varies based on the child's age. So infants, for parent subsidy, infants and toddlers and preschool age, all the same. But it still varies on the type of full-time program, center or family day home. And it still doesn't vary on where you are in Alberta or how much a family is actually paying in fees. For part-time preschool programs, It's still $125 for all, but now it goes up to $180,000 or $179,999. It still requires an application and for applicants to meet certain criteria. I don't think this has changed from the previous criteria, but I'm happy to be corrected on that if anybody knows different. The second part is still the infant care incentive. It's still the same as it was. It was actually originally going to be eliminated as part of the new affordability system, but was saved at the last minute, I think due to providers speaking up. I may be oversimplifying that, but it remains in effect right now. I put that here because eliminating that would have put pressure on programs to raise infant fees by $150 or to eat that fee in some way. The new part of the affordability system is the affordability grant. This does not vary by income, and all families get it when they register, when they enroll their child in the space, even those making more than $180,000 per year, all families, regardless of income. It does vary based on the age of the child and the type of program, but again, not on location within Alberta or on the fees that a program is charging. For part-time preschool programs, it's a flat 75, doesn't vary. And again, every family gets that. There's no application needed for the affordability grant. It happens automatically from a parent's perspective. So I'd like to compare this in a picture, the old system and the new system. That's a lot of information, and a lot of what we'll see is driven by all these changes. So what I've got a picture of in front of you is what I'm called total government help for a preschool age child in a center who's on full parent subsidy. So in the old system, that was $644, and it's all need-based. So once you got past $89,999, this was zero. There was no help, okay? So you can see in the old, it's all parent subsidy and it's all orange, which means it's need-based. In the new system on the right, you can see it's more generous overall than the old system for a child on full subsidy. And this is also going up to families making up to $120,000, $716 versus $644. But the affordability grant, which is not need-based, that's blue, now makes up a larger proportion of the total help that families get compared to parent subsidies, which are need-based, orange. So that is what it looks like for a preschool age child. This is true for all children at all incomes, or all ages of children at all incomes and in all full-time programs, so the exact numbers vary. The not need-based portion of the help is now bigger than the need-based portion of the help. So I'm going to do this a couple of times. Let's stop and catch our breath and summarize where we're at. Every family in this new system gets more total government help in dollars than it did under the old system. And some families, as we'll see in a graph in a minute, might actually already be paying $10 a day for childcare or less. But the new system is less need-based than the old one. So in the picture, the blue part is bigger than the orange part. That's true for all families with children in licensed care in Alberta. So now I'm going to move to a couple of graphs, and I'm sort of going to talk through these carefully, if I can, without going too long. I'm going to have to keep checking my time. This graph shows a number of, or this table shows a number of things. If you look at family income down the side, you see family income in this table goes from 20,000 to 180,000 plus. The next column is the dollar reduction that this family will get for a preschool age child in center-based care. You have to assume that when you make these kind of tables. And what you can see there is that the dollar reduction, or sort of how much less they're paying under the new system, for 20,000, for a family making 20,000, 40,000 gross, it's $72 a month. And then it ramps up dramatically, right? For a family that is making 100,000, which is in this green zone. The green zone indicates this is a family that gets full subsidy under the new program. it ramps up to $716. And then as we move into partial subsidy, that's yellow, we see this kind of feathers down, 703, 650, 596, until you get to families who make $180,000 or more, who are only getting the affordability or the non-need-based grant, which is $450. So you can see there's a range in dollar reductions, and it's much less for families that make less money because, in part, the old system helped these families originally. The new system still helps them, but proportionately much less, right, than sort of middle income and even sort of upper income families. So we can calculate what families in Edmonton and Calgary, if you're just using median costs, might actually pay. So when you see in that third column, Edmonton out-of-pocket costs at $224, that's about $10 a day if you're paying $940 a month. I use Edmonton because that's the median in Edmonton, but it doesn't matter where you're paying. If you're paying $940 somewhere in Calgary or somewhere else, these are the numbers that you will actually pay out of pocket as a family. And then if you look at Calgary, you notice those jump up, and it's 482, 482, 495, 748. Because, and we'll come back to this over and over again, just like in previous systems, subsidies don't react to the fees that you're paying as a family, right? So if you pay higher fees, you still get the same subsidy, right? Whether you're paying $2,000 a month or $1,000 a month, or whether the fees in your program are $2,000 or $1,000, you still get the same subsidy. So this is the pattern that we see, and these are uneven reductions in out-of-pocket costs compared to the old system. So I'm switching here to something that, if you've seen the brief that I've written on this, this is the first graphic on that. And what those uneven reductions mean is that some lower and higher income families aren't actually getting a 50% reduction in out-of-pocket costs. This is again assuming a preschool age child in center-based care at median fees for Calgary, which is in green, and Edmonton, which is in yellow. And you can see that a family, I'll just point, the family at 40,000 gets a 24% reduction in Edmonton and a 13% reduction in Calgary. At 100,000, it jumps up to 76 and 60. And then at 180, it's 48 and 38. And then that's essentially the same as we go from there. So, and the blue line there is a 50% reduction for your reference. So you can see that the reductions are uneven, right? They're in fact weighted a bit. Their families with lower incomes tend to get less of that reduction. So before I go on to a couple other graphs, I'm going to introduce something that we need to make friends with, I think, called FIAM. This is actually more familiar than a lot of you might imagine. FIAM stands for Family Income Affordability Measure, and it's just a fancy way of saying the percent of a family's net income spent on childcare. We talk about this all the time, 20%, 30%, 80%, right? So FIAM is just a simple way of capturing that. It's a better way, in my opinion, of measuring affordability than just fees because it takes family incomes, right? It makes more sense to say percentage of a family income than it just than it is to just talk about straight fees. I think it gives you a better sense of what's going on and how families react. And I will say that you can send your love letters to Gordon Cleveland for creating and calculating FIAMs in general, but also in this brief and in this presentation. And I've provided a link to some of his recent work there if you're interested. And just so for reference, a FIAM of 20% means you're spending, a family's spending 20% of its after-tax income on childcare. So if it's $40,000, it's $8,000. If it's $100,000, a family making $100,000, that's $20,000. Okay. So now that we have some sense of what FIAM is, the uneven reductions that we saw before mean uneven improvements in FIAM, which I'm using as a measure of affordability. With one child in care, we're back to our preschooler, and this one is in Calgary. So again, we have family income on the left. That's gross income. FIAM is calculated on net or after-tax income. But you can see the patterns With the old system, we had 23% at 20,000, and then it gets a little funny because of the way that the subsidy system used to work, but it kind of goes down off and on. Under the new system, you can see there's improvements for everybody, and that's the last column on the far right. That's our improvement in FIAM or affordability. But you can see if you look at that column on the far right called improvement, that the improvements are uneven, right? It's somewhat more affordable for lower income families, but it's a fair bit more affordable when you get into these sort of middle income, 100,000, 120, 140,000, right? Even 80,000. And then it sort of goes back down as the parent subsidy goes down. But one thing to note is that as families make more money, the same childcare gets more affordable, right? $2,000 a month is more affordable if you make $200,000 a year than $100,000. And so you see these FIAMs kind of get low and stay low toward the bottom, right, or toward the higher incomes. Now, this is just the same graph or same table that you just looked at, but it's assuming a Calgary family with an infant in care and that preschooler in care as well. So two children in care costs more money, right? So you can look at the FIAMs, the new FIAM, and then the improvement. And what you're seeing here is that with more children, whatever is happening is magnified, right? So the improvement, so all of the improvements are magnified because it's two children, but the improvements are bigger, which means the affordability improvements are bigger, as you get in the middle. And then if you look at the new FIAM, you'll notice even under the new regime here, a family with really low incomes, 20,000 or 40,000, you're looking at 33%, 23%, even 60,000 is at 18%. And actually none of these are below 10%. We'll get to that in a second. So all of this comes down to meaning that larger, so more than one child in care, lower income families are still facing potentially unaffordable childcare. And when I say unaffordable, I'm going with a FIAM of about 10% per child, or depending on how you want to look at it, 10% for all children or less for all children in the family. I just wanted to point out that if affordable means no more than 10% of your income per child goes to childcare in the new system, this is all in the new system. Childcare is affordable for families with one preschool age child paying median Calgary fees only if they're making $60,000 or more. If it means 10% for all children and family combined, it's unaffordable for families with two children paying those same fees, even if they're making $180,000. Or basically 0 to 180,000. And childcare is really unaffordable. That's meaning FIAM of 20% or more for those same families if they're making less than $60,000. So I'm going to stop, have us catch our breath again, and say, what have we arrived at here? Well, we've noticed that childcare is now more affordable, again, for families under this new system compared to the old system. Everybody is better off. It's more affordable. But because of the uneven reductions in out-of-pocket costs, childcare may still be unaffordable for families with lower incomes, more children in care, and those who are living in areas or attending programs with higher fees. So I'm going to move through this last bit, which is again a lot of information, but it's things that I think that are important. So we need to talk about the fees portion of this. Remember that the short-term goal is to reduce licensed childcare fees by an average of 50% for families with children 0 to kindergarten age. But as we've seen, if you're lower income, you're probably going to get less than a 50% reduction. You're probably going to be under that average, right? Because this new system is less needs-based. If you have people who live in an area where the fees are higher, or you go to a higher fee program, you're probably going to get less than a 50% reduction because the subsidies don't increase or vary to match higher fees. They're all the same throughout the entire province. Another question, or one question might be, why did I use Calgary fees to look at affordability in those last two? Well, it's a judgment call, but I'm actually using 2020 fees for those because they're the most recent fees publicly available for Edmonton, Calgary, and Lethbridge. I didn't look at Lethbridge in this in particular. But if past trends hold, 2021 fees are going to be higher than those were in 2020. And because, again, the total government help here doesn't vary with fee levels, that means everything is in reality likely to be at least a little bit worse than I've calculated here. And I'd say it's entirely possible that in 2022, many families across Alberta and in different places will actually be paying close to 2020 Calgary level fees. So some of this might actually end up being accurate, even though Calgary is one of the most expensive places in 2020. So let's look at where fees might be going if they're so important in Alberta. Under the new affordability system, existing childcare programs that participate must limit their fee increases to a 3% increase in 2022 and a 3% increase from that in 2023. But I'll note that new programs that open in 2022 or 2023 can set fees where they'd like. So that 3% increase from 2022 is from programs that existed in 2021. So broad concern here is that some new programs will set fees higher because all parents are now getting more help from the government, which means that the provincial government may need to increase total help more than 3% to keep up those affordability gains that we just achieved. But increasing government help might encourage new programs to set fees higher in later years if there are new openings, resulting in a sort of arms race where fees and government help keep kind of raising or upping the ante. I did see that there was a new center-based program opening in 2022 in Calgary, in the Calgary suburbs, that appears to be charging $2,150 for an infant spot and $1,850 for a preschool age spot. So this would be an example of a new program that opened in 2022. And I just want to say, like, those, I don't know how typical that is because I don't know the range within Calgary, but median fees in Calgary in 2020 were $1,435 and $1,198. So those are somewhere $600 to $700 more than the median fees in 2020. Also remember that programs don't have to participate in this whole system at all. If you're a program and you want to opt out and therefore increase your fees as much as you'd like set your fees where you'd like and increase them as much as you'd like per year, you can do that. But you don't get affordability grants to pass on to your families, and the families that go to those programs don't qualify for parent subsidies, to my knowledge. So, so that is one thing that that programs can do and might affect affordability in some places. Another concern that I've heard raised with this system is if the 3% increases that programs are allowed every year can't match increases in programs' costs, programs will have to start cutting somewhere or finding other income sources. And this is because under this system, programs still rely primarily on parent fees for their income. And there's no consistent sort of operating help to programs from the provincial government apart from the infant care incentive, which is actually the only thing that I've seen that goes to help programs operate that doesn't have to be passed on in this affordability system to parents. So I'll say, cutting, like if you're a program and you're falling behind because 3% isn't helping you as much, cutting labor costs is an obvious solution because they tend to be the largest single cost for ELC's early learning and childcare programs. But programs can handle that in any number of different ways, finding other sources of income. One way might be charging parents for additional items or activities as a way to try to make up for their increasing costs without being able to increase their fees. So what are the options for dealing with this situation if one wants to deal with this situation? The simplest short-term policy option is to raise the parent subsidy, or I'm going to call back here, the orange need-based part of the new system. It's the simplest way to work within the system without massively changing it. This could happen in two ways. You can raise the parent subsidy, or the province could raise the parent subsidy by taking money from elsewhere in the provincial budget, or it could keep the amount of money that it is devoting to the affordability grants and parent subsidies right now and just take money from the affordability grants and put them into the more need-based parent subsidies. That would sort of, in my mind, sort of rebalance these uneven reductions. The second short-term policy option, honestly, is to study the effects of this new system as it rolls out. As we've seen, or as I've tried to say, we need to dig deeper than averages. An average of $10 a day childcare, an average of a 50% reduction tend to mask really big variations. Very important ones, I think, too. There was an article called Childcare Subsidies Making an Impact that noted that medicine hat parents are excited and spaces seem to be filling up, but a few other details in that article. I think part of this is we need to know what's happening with lower income families. Are they entering programs more now because it's more affordable for them, or are they leaving programs because maybe it's still unaffordable for budgets? Maybe to be replaced by middle or upper income families who find childcare much more affordable now than they used to. What is happening in different parts of the province? How are families in different parts in Calgary and Edmonton, Lethbridge, places like that? There's a lot of variation in fees. So what is happening in different parts of the province? I think this is the kind of thing that we need to study, we need to understand going forward. And then there's some longer term policy options. One would be to move to a fee cap plus subsidy system. A fee cap establishes a maximum daily or monthly program fee that programs could charge. And then programs receive operating funding to make up for the lower fees. We would also, in this system, this is the subsidy part of it, you keep the need-based parent subsidy, which means that lower income families could pay less than the cap, or maybe even nothing. And yes, this is the basic idea of the NDP's $25 a day program, the affordability portion. That $25 a day program had a lot more to it than just an affordability aspect. This can help control or try to manage that arms race potential, perhaps, and reduce variation in fees across Alberta. And I want to point out that the goal of $10 a day childcare in the federal Alberta agreement, and really I think in the federal goals, looks like it is pointing toward a fee cap. It looks like it requires a fee cap, but that's not actually quite right. The language, again, is to lower average licensed childcare fees to $10 a day. That's not a fee cap. That is an on average goal for fees. So I just want to point out that $10 a day childcare doesn't mean everybody's fee is $10 a day. It's an average goal. Another way to do this, similar, is a fee cap plus a sliding scale fee system. So it's similar to a fee cap plus subsidy. The real difference is that instead of a subsidy, which requires an application, lower income families simply pay less based on their annual income or tax returns, however you might want to measure that. It tends to be simpler. You don't have an application, and so it tends to require less sort of red tape in that sense. And then the biggest overarching change would be to move to a public system where all programs become publicly funded, so they don't have to charge parent fees at all. And again, from a parent affordability point of view, this is very similar to the existing public K through 12 school system. So each of these longer term options would need fleshing out. These are sort of broad policy options that are presented here, and each has what I'm understating is non-trivial implementation issues to address. But from an affordability, and particularly a parent affordability, a family affordability point of view, they may have better potential for achieving sort of more equitable and predictable affordability for families than our current, or what I'm calling the new system. So that is all of the information I'm going to spout out, at least in this presentation tonight. Thank you very much. I've also left something at the bottom there. Please visit the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care's website, ECELC.ca. If you'd like more information about affordability, but also a lot of other things. The council does a lot more work than just affordability. So thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rob. That was awesome. I loved it. I read the brief, but then that was like, oh, now I get more. Yay. Christy, do you want to do we want to go ahead with questions? Do we want to read some of the comments that people have left?
Yeah, I think the chat box, the questions or the comments in the question box, yes, it would be great to read them.
And then if anyone does want to ask a question or make a comment, you can put your hand up and then we'll look through there and unmute people as we go. So one of the comments from Bernice Taylor is that it would be interesting if the province had a maximum fee that they would allow new programs as they come on board, meaning they can't be more than a certain percentage higher than the median fees that had already been noted in the rollout. Is that something that would impact affordability from this perspective, Rob?
Yeah, that's an option that could be put in. It's not a fee cap, right? Like, and it's actually operating within, operating within the system, so it doesn't require the kind of big shift that we would need to have a fee cap and subsidy. But yeah, that's absolutely an option to try to address that, both the sort of arms race idea, but also the unevenness idea. I think that's certainly something that could be brought in and considered at least. Yeah, thanks, Bernice.
Wonderful. I think Ricardo had a question. How will the government be paying the affordability portion?
How will it be paying the affordability portion? To my knowledge, the affordability, so this is why we call something the affordability grant. It's kind of changed names a bit. So that gets paid, and operators, or those who operate, correct me if I'm wrong, if my understanding is wrong, that is basically a pass-through to parents. So that goes to programs, and then programs have to use it to reduce parent fees directly. So it's not what we call an operating grant, despite it being a grant that goes to operators. So it gets a little confusing in that sense. An operating grant is more like that infant care incentive that goes to operators, and then operators can use it as they deem necessary to help in their operations.
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. They're just coming in now. I think Candy's was next. If the daycares keep increasing their fees, there's no way parents can achieve $10 a day in 2025-26. You just have to pick cheaper monthly fee daycare. Then parents' portions would also be cheaper after the grants and subsidies. So more of a comment, I think.
No, and I think that reflects, where we are right now. Some people are going to have $10 a day right now, right? with some programs. One of the things that I didn't talk about, I guess, in this presentation is that this is a high-level look at patterns across the province and patterns based on the policy. Your individual mileage may vary, right? If you have a lower income, or sorry, if you have the subsidy, say $716 a month, so that's a preschooler on full subsidy and the affordability grant together, and the program that you're going to is $800 a month, right? Before that, then it's quite cheap, right? If it's $3,000 a month, it's $3,000 minus 716. And so as fees go up every year, the government is going to have to increase subsidies. And that is to try to achieve these goals, right? An average of $10 a day is actually going to be something there's still a big hurdle to get over to get there. We have a long way, especially as fees will go up every year. So there's going to have to be more money sort of put into this the subsidy system, and it has to be reevaluated constantly, right, to make sure that's happening.
Yeah, and I think, there's another comment from Lisa that sort of echoes that you know, in a program, her program is supporting vulnerable families. And so their families have seen prices rise from $150 a month to $474 a month per child. And that's huge. That's like 3 times. So the impact on those very lower income or vulnerable families is significant in this. And it's really, like you said, masked by the sort of overall average or look of it, you know, like, oh, we're giving this much to everybody, but you see the gap is really wide at the bottom there. And I found that really interesting just myself, that the gap is the widest at the lowest income and narrower, and even at the highest income it's smaller than it is at the lowest income. So we sort of like we're going, they're inverse. Got the wrong thing. So,
Yeah, and this is why it's sort of the FIAM, or the affordability, or the percent of family income is important, because if you look at just reductions in fees, it's sort of low at lower income and then gets high and then kind of comes back down a bit. But if you look at affordability, right, or the FIAM, it tends to go like this, right? So even though higher income families are getting kind of less help than sort of what you might call middle income, I'm using these terms sort of loosely, but they're getting less help than middle income. In some, they don't need it as much, right?
Yeah.
And you see that in these FIAM numbers that are small, right? If you make $1 million, then your FIAM is itty bitty, right?
Yeah.
That's just because you just have a lot of money. So that's a way that reflects that, or tries to.
Well, and I think that FIAM measurement is possibly a tool for educators and us, you know, going back into the field, just to have another way of thinking about it, and of making requests of government, and of, you know, talking to parents about what's happening and saying, you know what, it's not just this affordability sounds really good and everybody wants things to be more affordable, but that really captures the nuances of it a bit better than just strict affordability, because nobody wants to take affordability away from anybody. However, affordability is not equally distributed in this model.
It's
and using just the sort of blunt edge of affordability doesn't allow us to capture those nuances of what might actually be happening.
Yeah, that's true. So sorry, I can't see the comments or anything, so I'm happy.
There are lots of comments. I'm just trying to look for one. If there's a question that we can.
I think many comments, and then the questions kind of blended with what you guys just answered. So
there's one here. How have other provinces come up with the actual cost of care? Quebec has a set fee. Have they set a wage scale, an operational cost, and then a fee for the family? And how does this work, reflecting on the diversity, you know, between places in Alberta, Calgary, Edmonton, rural, etc.? Do you have any insights on that, Rob?
I don't. This is one of those situations where I would say in a class, I'll get back to you on that. It's one of those things that I feel that I should know, and I probably should know, but I don't want to speak off the cuff on that right now. I'm sorry about that.
I wonder if there's anybody who wants to raise their hand and maybe ask a question. No, are we missing any in the chat, Janet or Leah?
So, and maybe someone could answer or confirm, I guess, for us. So someone is asking, is this the government backdating this to January? So for programs that have billed their parent portions as normal based on the 644 subsidy, do we need to issue refunds, or how is that being accounted for?
Oh yeah, that's a technical question that I'm not that I would be guessing at.
Yeah, and us as well. So I'm not sure if anyone with that knowledge is here because again, those are tricky.
Yeah, and I will say that I'm not entirely sure about this, but there may have been a bit of a timing issue for some programs that was a little frustrating at the end of the year. If they set their fees for 2022 before the agreement was signed in November. So I know some programs might have set that, and now they're having to kind of go back or maybe negotiate with the province about whether that's 3%, and if it's not 3%, wait a minute, I didn't know this was coming. So I think there's some confusion or negotiation on that. I don't honestly know that much about it, but I know that might have been that might be impacting some programs and maybe some parent fees as well, where there might be some rebates or or things coming back in there.
And Rob, here's one that I think was in the presentation, so maybe we can roll back to it. So Patricia's asking, besides an increase in subsidy for low-income families or lower-income families, what other answer is there? And I think some of your options may have covered that. So do you mind reviewing those a little bit?
Sure. So when I put the options out, I sort of go from least change to most change, right? Is sort of the idea. So the one that the increasing the subsidy or the need-based portion of the parent subsidy is sort of like it's the least, it requires the least amount of change of the new system. It just essentially requires some tweaking of numbers and infusion of money. The fee cap idea, so fee cap and subsidy establishes a fee cap. So this is what, when we talk about Quebec, we sort of $7 a day childcare or $10 a day childcare, things like that. That's a fee cap, right? So it's something that no parent pays more than. This is $25 a day or whatever, right? And then the subsidy portion of that then chips away at that if you're lower income. So and if we did FIAM calculations on that, what would happen is that lower income families would get the subsidy in an attempt to kind of keep them at a certain percentage or even below it at a certain FIAM. Because, $500 a month sounds to some of us affordable, to others it sounds astronomical, right? Because of the percentage of the income it is. So fee cap and subsidy. So we've sort of did that before with the NDP plus. The program was much more than that, but and then fee cap with a sliding scale. So in that case, you don't even just apply for a subsidy. Essentially, families just say, I make this much, and instead of being charged $500 a month, they're charged $400 a month, something like that, right? And then going down with lower incomes. And then a public system is much like what we see in a K through 12 system. So we don't have, like in the public schools here in Edmonton, I'm not charged a fee, right? When my daughter goes to, grade 2 or grade 3 or grade 8, right? So that is a wholesale shift though, right? That's a massive change from the system that we have right now. And it has all sorts of issues that come along with it, different policy issues, right? But from an affordability perspective, and that's largely what I've been trying to look at, that is much simpler for parents and it's much more consistent, right? So massive change, but it really does, it massively changes the affordability landscape too. It really, it essentially addresses that issue in one fell swoop by reducing it to zero. Those aren't the only, I will say, those aren't the only options that have ever been tried anywhere, right? Those are when I give policy options like this, I'm sort of giving broad idea options, right? That you would then kind of tweak as you go.
In terms of, someone else is asking here if there is sort of a FIAM tool that parents could use, or is that something that's out there that you could give us a link to that we can make available through ACE's website?
So
or is it
I
more sort of a philosophical calculation?
No, well, this is where I turned to Gordon Cleveland, right? Actually, Gordon Cleveland, who's an economist who's been working in early learning and childcare for many, many years, decades. And full credit to him for coming up with this calculation. He actually has another one that's called the Caregiving Parent Affordability Measure, which is roughly the percent of the income of the parent for 2-income households or 2-parent households, the percent of the income that's of the parent who would be caring for who would stay home for the child. How much does childcare eat up of their income? That is actually, in some ways, an even more interesting affordability measure, because it reflects kind of what people are actually making real decisions on. Like,
Yeah.
that's often a very real calculation for families. So there's those two. But for FIAM itself, I would direct people. Actually, the Business Council of Alberta has an online tool. If you go to their website and you search, I think it's, you might just search childcare calculator. They have an online tool that actually Gordon and Alicia, who's an economist over there at Business Council of Alberta, have sort of started on this. So I direct people over to that. You can enter things in, bits and pieces there. But in terms of building out something like that, we have a little way to go on that.
Okay.
I direct people to that. But if people are interested, that's certainly, that kind of calculation is a thing. I will say on FIAM calculations, and I didn't want to get into this in the presentation, you do have to make certain assumptions about families, right? About who's working and who's not, and what the distributions, because you have to go from a gross income to a net income, right? And you have to make assumptions about a family. And again, every family is different on that. So, so you have to make certain assumptions. But that kind of thing is out there and could be made. I'd love for that to become a more consistent tool in government policy evaluation. I think it's actually quite useful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think maybe on ACE's part, we can do a little more digging and perhaps make something. If there's something to be made available we can make that available on the website too. So, and I recognize for many of the things that we're seeing in the question box, they're not actually questions that we can answer. I know people have so many implementation questions about when and who and how, and the only people who have that information are people in children's services. That has not been spread out. Those are not things that we have. And so I feel terrible because I know this is what is on people's minds, but we don't have those answers. And I'm hoping that this sort of, at least having this perspective on affordability and where it's fitting in our current system. And Rob, I really appreciate that, of thinking about, steps that we may have to get away from our current system in terms of, balancing out this equity issue or affordability issue in an equitable way, that we may not be able to operate fully within the system that we have. We may have to think about what are the building blocks we've put in place, and are they actually appropriate to doing what we want them to do. So I think that's a good perspective too, for us to think about. This isn't the only way that we can have an early learning and childcare system. There are other options, and using different information like FIAM versus just a strict affordability calculator allows us to see what else we can do with things. So I think that, as much as it doesn't necessarily ease the concern of people who have in the thick of it questions, which I absolutely respect, it does give us a sense that more is possible once we kind of navigate the paperwork of whatever this step is. So.
That's right. And I'd encourage, like, this is interesting to me, right? But this is also continue as much as possible. I would encourage programs and early childhood educators to keep an eye on this within their programs. I mean, I don't know how this is going to roll out, right? Like, I don't know how this is actually going to affect different types of families. I've projected at it, but this is just looking at numbers and putting them together. I think I'm quite curious, and I would hope that the government would be too, about how I mean, we're spending billions of dollars on this, and I think we do need to know, and we need to hear from people about what it means and how it's changing programs, hopefully for the better, right? But but how it's changing who attends programs and how they're doing.
And is it having the impact that we anticipated to have, or that we hope it's going to have, based on this very large sum of money that we're investing into the system and into these things? Are we actually making the impacts we want to have? So I think that's an important point to put this, what the impact is, back to government so that they know, and in some ways, whether you've been officially asked for it or not, because that door is always open to give that feedback, to say, this is what's actually happening on the ground. You know, some things, they look really good when you write them down and it looks like all the boxes are checked, but like you say, these are just numbers on a page. What that actually looks like with the people involved can be quite different.
Yeah, that's right.
And I guess that goes back to what Leah was saying in the beginning, is that Minister Schultz has offered for email to hear those specific cases, or those stories, or those solutions or ideas that we have. So to always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure many more came in after.
Oh, go ahead, Christy.
I was going to say, I'm not sure many more, any questions came in after. Just more of the same technical and comments that we had. So guess we'll wind down.
Yeah, and I think, I'll just end with this slide, which has some of that contact information on it, in terms of, writing to the minister. You can write directly to the minister through this email address, cs.minister, or cs.childcare@gov.ab.ca. And then just general resources for what else is happening and how this is rolling out elsewhere, and Childcare Now and the Canadian Childcare Federation and AECEA's website. So do give this feedback to government about what is actually happening in your programs, because we don't know what the impact of this is going to be until it actually happens. And the sooner we know what those impacts are, the sooner, if pivots need to be made, maybe we all hate that word, I don't know, but if changes need to be made, maybe we hate that word too, who knows, it's COVID. If we need to do things differently, maybe that can happen. And like Rob has said, there are other things that can happen. So what are the possibilities that are out there? So Rob, thank you so much. This was extremely informative. And again, thank you everyone for coming. We had really great attendance and we really appreciate your time. I know that some of you may be leaving feeling you didn't have your questions answered, and that's frustrating. And when and if we have more, we will share more. Right now, we have the same thing that everybody else has, which is a lot of questions, but we're thankful to have experts like Rob who can at least help us wade through the whys and hows of we got here. So we appreciate your time, Rob. Thank you so much. And for everyone who came today, we appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time on AC Connect.
Love the exit. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thanks so much.
Good night.
I appreciate that.
Bye.
Bye.